The largest animal that has ever existed on this planet is alive right now. Not in the fossil record, not in the age of dinosaurs, now. A blue whale can reach 30 meters and weigh more than 150 tons. Its heart is the size of a small car. Its tongue alone weighs about as much as an elephant. And one day, that animal dies. What happens next is one of the strangest events in the natural world. It has a name. Scientists call it a whale fall. And for almost the entire history of science, nobody had ever seen one. Here's what makes it strange. The body sinks. It drops through the water for hours, past the light, past the last of the blue, into a place where the pressure would crush a submarine, and the temperature sits just above freezing. And it lands on the emptiest place on Earth. The deep seafloor is a desert. There is no sunlight, so there are no plants. There is almost no food. The animals that live down there survive on crumbs, a slow drizzle of dead plankton falling from above, which scientists call marine snow. Then, 100 tons of meat and fat and bone arrives all at once. It is the single largest delivery of food that place will ever receive. And what grows out of it is not a meal. It is an entire ecosystem, and it will still be running long after everyone watching this video is gone. A single large whale can support life on that patch of seafloor for 50 to 100 years. 50 to 100 years from one body. Now, before we follow it down, there is something you need to know about how we found out any of this. We did not discover whale falls through careful searching. We found one by accident. In 1987, the research submersible Alvin was working in the Santa Catalina Basin off Southern California, more than 1,200 meters down. The expedition was led by a scientist named Craig Smith. They were not looking for a dead whale. Nobody was looking for dead whales because nobody had any particular reason to think they mattered. And then, on the bottom, in the dark, their lights fell on a skeleton. It was about 21 meters long, a blue whale or a fin whale, they could not be certain which, and it was covered in life. That single accidental encounter opened an entire field of research. Everything we know about what a whale body does after death, every stage, every species, every timeline, comes from work that started after that moment. Which means that for the whole of human history before 1987, this was happening constantly, everywhere, and we had no idea. But that accident created a problem. If you want to study how a whale fall develops, you have to be there when it starts, and you cannot predict where a whale is going to die. Waiting for another accident could take decades. So researchers did something that sounds slightly absurd and is in fact excellent science. They started sinking whales on purpose. When a whale strands and dies on a beach, which happens regularly, the carcass has to be disposed of somehow. Instead of burying it or letting it rot on the sand, teams began towing some of these bodies out to deep water, weighting them, and deliberately sending them to the seafloor at a known location. Then they came back, again and again, for years. That is how we know the sequence, not from guessing, but from returning to the same skeleton at intervals and photographing who is living on it this time. It is a strange kind of long-term study. The subject is already dead when the experiment begins, and the experiment can outlast the career of the scientist who started it. Smith's own team sank 3 gray whales over a period of 6 years and went back to them again and again with submersibles and remote vehicles. And that first skeleton, the one found by accident in 1987, its chemical-powered community was still running 15 years later, in 2002. Still alive, still being visited. The whale is dead. The research is very much alive. Let us start with something that sounds too simple to matter. Why does the whale sink at all? It is not automatic. When a large animal dies, bacteria inside the body produce gas. That gas builds up in the gut and the tissues, and it makes the carcass float. Whales that die near the surface often bloat and drift for days or weeks. Some wash ashore. And if you have ever seen a news report about a stranded whale that had to be handled very carefully, that is why. A bloated carcass is a pressurized container, and it can rupture. For a whale fall to happen at all, the body has to sink faster than the gas can build up, or sink from deep enough water that the pressure keeps the gas compressed. Cold water helps. Depth helps. A body that goes down in deep, cold ocean stays down, and once it passes a certain depth, it cannot come back. The pressure prevents the gas from expanding. The whale is committed. So it falls. 100 tons descending through water in near total darkness, slowly rotating for 1 hour, 2 hours, sometimes more, depending on how deep the ocean is beneath it. And then it lands, and the desert wakes up. Stage 1. The scavengers. The first arrivals show up within hours. They can detect the body from kilometers away, carried on the current as a plume of chemical signal. Hagfish come first, and hagfish are worth a moment on their own. They are long, pale, eel-shaped animals that are barely fish at all. They have no jaws. Instead, they have a rasping plate of teeth, and they burrow directly into the carcass and eat it from the inside out. They are also famous for something else. When threatened, a hagfish releases slime, an extraordinary amount of it, almost instantly. A single animal can turn a bucket of seawater into gel in seconds. It is a defense mechanism, and it works. A predator that bites a hagfish gets a mouthful of expanding mucus in its gills. So the first thing to arrive at the biggest banquet in the ocean is a jawless animal that eats from the inside and defends its meal with slime. Behind them come the others, sleeper sharks moving slowly through the cold, taking bites out of the flanks, crabs, and amphipods, small crustaceans that arrive in swarms so dense that the surface of the body seems to shimmer and move. Together they strip the soft tissue, all of it. For a large whale, this stage can last up to 2 years. Think about that. 2 years of continuous feeding by thousands of animals on one body. And here's what makes it matter, rather than just being grim. Most deep-sea animals live permanently on the edge of starvation. The deep ocean does not offer meals. It offers scraps, unpredictably, forever. Growth is slow. Reproduction is expensive and often postponed. A whale fall is not dinner. For some of these populations, it is the difference between persisting and disappearing. Then, eventually, the flesh runs out. The swarm disperses. The sharks move on. What is left on the seafloor is a skeleton and a patch of sediment soaked in everything that leaked out of the body during those 2 years. Most people would assume the story ends there. A body was eaten. The end. It has barely started. In fact, by duration, we are still in the first few % of this whale's second life, because what happens next does not need meat at all. Stage 2. The settlers. Once the soft tissue is gone, the character of the place changes completely. The animals that arrive now are not hunters or scavengers. They are colonists. The sediment around the skeleton is enormously enriched. It is loaded with organic material that dripped out of the carcass and settled into the mud. In the middle of a desert, something has just created soil. Worms move in, snails, small crustaceans, species that were scattered thinly across kilometers of empty seabed suddenly have a reason to concentrate in a single spot. And they do not only feed, they breed. The population around a whale fall explodes, because for the first time there is enough energy in one place to support reproduction rather than mere survival. Animals that might have spawned once in years can now do it properly. This stage runs from months to years. By the end of it, the bones are bare, clean, white, in a place where almost nothing is white. And now we reach the part that genuinely does not sound real, because the skeleton is not finished. The skeleton is not remotely finished. A whale's bones are not like ours. They are dense and they are saturated with lipids, fats, and oils, stored in the marrow and locked into the mineral structure itself. In the deep sea, that fat is not waste. It is treasure. If you are enjoying this, hit subscribe. This channel takes one animal at a time and goes all the way down, with real sources in the description. And tell me in the comments, had you ever heard of a whale fall before this video? Now, the strangest stage of all. Stage 3, when the bones start breathing. Bacteria colonize the skeleton. They work their way into the bone and begin breaking down the trapped fats. And as they do, they release hydrogen sulfide. If you have ever smelled rotten eggs, that is hydrogen sulfide. To us, it is toxic. In high enough concentrations, it is lethal. But down there, it is fuel. There is an entire branch of life on this planet that does not run on sunlight. It runs on chemistry. These organisms pull energy directly out of chemical compounds like hydrogen sulfide and build living tissue from it, with no sun involved at any point in the chain. You find that kind of life in two famous places: hydrothermal vents, where superheated water pours out of cracks in the ocean floor, and cold seeps, where chemicals leak upward from beneath the seabed. Both of those are geological, volcanic, permanent on any human timescale. And then there is the third place, a dead whale. The skeleton becomes a chemical engine. It generates the same energy currency as a volcanic vent, except the fuel is not the Earth's internal heat. The fuel is the animal's own body fat. Mats of white bacteria spread across the bones. Clams and mussels arrive, from the same families you find at vents, carrying symbiotic bacteria inside their own tissues. This stage is the longest by far. It runs for decades. And on those bones lives something that exists nowhere else on Earth. They were discovered in 2002 on a whale skeleton 3 kilometers down. Scientists named the genus Osedax. The name is Latin and it means bone devourer. Most people call them zombie worms. They look like tiny red plumes growing out of the bone, a few centimeters long, waving gently in the current. Underneath the surface, they have a root system that grows down into the skeleton, exactly like a plant growing into soil. Except this is not a plant. It is an animal, and it is eating the bone. Now here is the part that stops people. Osedax has no mouth. It also has no stomach, no gut, no digestive system of any kind. So how does an animal with no mouth eat a whale skeleton? It farms. Inside its root tissue, it houses colonies of symbiotic bacteria. The roots secrete acid that dissolves the bone. The bacteria break down the fats and proteins that are released, and the worm absorbs the products straight through its own tissue. It does not eat. It dissolves, digests by proxy, and absorbs. And in nature, these worms are found on one thing and one thing only: sunken whale bones. Their entire evolutionary existence is built around waiting for a whale to die. There is arguably a fourth stage, and it is the quietest one. Eventually, after decades, the fats are gone. The bacteria have extracted everything extractable. The bone worms have dissolved what they can. What is left is mineral, bare, hard, structural bone. And on a deep seafloor made almost entirely of soft mud, a hard surface is itself a rare and valuable thing. Most of the deep ocean floor is sediment, fine, soft, endless. If you are an animal that needs to anchor to something solid and filter food out of the current, a sponge, a coral, and an enemy, the mud is useless to you. You need rock. A whale skeleton is rock. It sticks up above the sediment, it catches the current, and it lasts. So the final residents of a whale fall are not eating the whale at all. They are simply standing on it, using it as furniture. A reef in a place with no reefs, made of an animal that died so long ago that nothing living there has any relationship with it whatsoever. The energy ran out decades earlier. The structure keeps working. And it will keep working until the bones finally dissolve into the seabed, and the whale becomes, at last, part of the floor. Which raises an obvious problem. If your species can only live on dead whales, how do you find the next one? A whale fall is a tiny island of life in an enormous desert. The next one might be 100 kilometers away. It might not appear for years, and you have no way of knowing where or when. The answer is brutal and elegant. Osedax reproduce constantly, releasing enormous numbers of larvae into the water, which drift with the currents. The overwhelming majority die without ever finding anything. A vanishingly small number happen to land on a skeleton. That is the whole strategy. Flood the ocean with offspring and let the mathematics do the work. There is another detail that makes them stranger still. In several Osedax species, every visible worm on the bone is female. The males are microscopic, and they live inside the female's own tube, dozens of them in a single female, and in some species, harems of more than 600. They never grow up, and they never feed on bone. They exist only to fertilize. An animal with no mouth, no stomach, and males the size of larvae, living exclusively on the skeletons of the largest creatures on Earth. If somebody invented that for a film, you would say it was too much. But the strategy only works under one condition. There have to be enough whale falls. And this is where a whale fall stops being a curiosity and starts being infrastructure. A single skeleton can host up to 190 species at once. For the deep sea, that is an astonishing density of life in one location. For many of those species, the whale is not food, it is habitat. It is the only place they can live, which means whale falls function as stepping stones. A population living on one skeleton sends larvae into the current. Some of them find the next skeleton, tens or hundreds of kilometers away. That one seeds the next. Over thousands of years, entire lineages move across the ocean floor by hopping from one dead whale to another. Researchers have even suggested that whale falls may have helped some species spread between hydrothermal vent systems, using dead whales as waypoints between volcanoes. The bodies are not just feeding the deep sea, they are connecting it. Take away the stepping stones, and the islands drift apart. Populations become isolated. Some of them do not make it. And it genuinely has to be a whale. Other animals die at sea constantly. Fish, seals, sharks, dolphins, seabirds, all of them sink. All of them get eaten. But smaller bodies produce a completely different outcome, and the reason is simple arithmetic. A small carcass is stripped in days and consumed entirely. There is nothing left to enrich the sediment for years, and crucially, there is not enough fat locked inside the bones to sustain a sulfur-based community. No third stage, no chemical engine, no zombie worms. The body arrives, it is eaten, and the desert closes over it as if nothing happened. There is a threshold, somewhere in the range of the largest animals, below which a dead body is just a meal, and above which it becomes an ecosystem. Whales are the only animals in the ocean that reliably cross it, which means that the entire deep-sea community we have been talking about, the bacterial mats, the vent clams, the bone-devouring worms with no mouths, exists because a group of mammals went back into the sea and got enormous. Every one of those species is downstream of a decision made by a land animal, roughly 50 million years ago, to return to the water. So what happens if the number of whale falls suddenly collapses? We already ran that experiment. We just did not know we were running it, because we had not discovered whale falls yet. In the 19th and 20th centuries, industrial whaling removed an almost unimaginable number of large whales from the world's oceans. Not thousands, millions. Blue whales, fin whales, sperm whales, right whales, the biggest animals, hunted precisely because they were the biggest and therefore the most valuable. Every one of those whales was a whale fall that never happened. We normally think about whaling in terms of the animals killed. That is the obvious loss, and it is enormous on its own. But underneath it, there is a second loss, and almost nobody talks about it. We did not only remove whales from the surface of the ocean, we removed an entire habitat type from the bottom of it. For roughly a century, the deep sea received a small fraction of the carcasses it had received for millions of years. Every species that depends on whale falls, the bone worms, the sulfur bacteria, the specialized clams, pass through a bottleneck that nobody measured in a place nobody could see. We do not know what was lost down there. There is no baseline. The first whale fall was not observed until 1987, by which point the whaling had already happened. We built the science only after we had spent 100 years removing the thing it studies. There is one more consequence, and it operates on a scale that is easy to miss. A whale is made of carbon, a very large amount of it. When a whale dies and sinks into deep water, that carbon goes down with it and is locked into the seafloor, into sediment, into bacteria, into animals that will never surface. It is removed from the system for a very long time. When a whale is killed at the surface and processed, that does not happen. The carbon stays in circulation. So the great whales were not only enormous animals and enormous ecosystems, they were also a slow, steady conveyor belt moving carbon from the sunlit surface down into the deep, one body at a time, for millions of years. We interrupted the conveyor belt for a century, and now, finally, the part of the story that goes the other way. Several whale populations are recovering. Not all of them, and not everywhere. But humpbacks in particular have come back from the edge in a way that very few people predicted. Every one of those whales, if it lives a full life and dies of old age in deep water, is a 50 to 100-year ecosystem delivered to the seafloor. The deep sea is being slowly restocked, one body at a time. Let me leave you with the thing I find hardest to hold in my head. Somewhere in the ocean, right now, at this exact moment, there is a whale skeleton lying on the seafloor that has been there since before you were born. It is still working. Bacteria are still breaking down fat inside those bones. Worms with no mouths are still dissolving them from the inside. Clams are still filtering chemicals out of the water around it. There is a small, permanent, self-sustaining community living on the remains of an animal that died decades ago, in complete darkness, and not one of them will ever know what the sun looks like. We tend to think of death as an ending. It is the point where a story stops. In the deep ocean, the death of the largest animal on Earth is the single most generous thing that can happen. It is a century of life handed to a place that has almost nothing, and nearly every guest at that table arrives long after the body itself is gone. The biggest animal in the world falls into the emptiest place in the world and turns it for 100 years into the richest. If you want more like this, one animal taken all the way down, subscribe. I do them one at a time. I will see you in the next one.